All right, everyone, you can grab a seat. Welcome, everyone. Beautiful day. I'm Pete Bellotti, in charge of the Hall of Fame, and we'd like to thank everyone for coming out on this beautiful day for our third Hall of Fame induction. And it's a real honor to see all of you here, and hope you guys have a great day and have fun. All right, and now here is the introduction of our ceremony, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon and welcome to this wonderful event. This is the third, as Jim just said on the recording there, the third WCWP Hall of Fame induction ceremony. I've been very happy to have been at the first two and am delighted to be your host here this afternoon. My respect for the four inductees is off the charts, and I had the wonderful good fortune of actually working with Frank and with Bill professionally once I finished my time here. Actually, some of it was during my time here at WCWP. And so that makes this a very special day for me. While I was introduced on there, just for those that don't know me, I was a student here in the early and mid-1970s and had the really good fortune to work with three of the four inductees. Rita is the only one I didn't get to work with, but always admired her as she went on to her fabulous career that we're going to hear more about this afternoon. I first want to acknowledge, he's sitting way in the back, Dan Cox, the Director of Broadcasting at WCWP, for his efforts in setting this up. And this is becoming a really special event each year. And you did briefly see Pete Bellotti, who was the coordinator of this event and helped arrange to have the voting and get everyone just voted in. And today is the big induction day. Pete immediately left. Pete said hi and ran. Oh, there he is. He's hiding out there. And our audio man, Zach, is currently on the staff at WCWP. Thank you, Zach. And just to let you know, once we're finished here today, Dan has invited everyone over to the station. You can come over to the station. If you haven't been over at WCWP recently, you should come over and see all the changes that have taken place. Even if you've been there, let's say, in the last several months, there are some new additions, some new twists and turns over there, so come on over and take a look. Dan is making this free this afternoon. It's free, right, Dan? The usual $49.95 being waived this afternoon. Free tour of WCWP as soon as we're done here today. So let's get the proceedings going. I want to introduce, there are two Hall of Fame members here today that were inducted both last year. One is the lovely and talented Bernie Bernard over here. And on this side of the room, the lovely and talented Bill Moser is over here. And I think I'm supposed to invite, Bill is supposed to join me up here first, as I understand the directions that we are under, this highly choreographed thing that we're doing here today. Now, are we supposed to move over here? And I'm supposed to bring the mic over? As you see, this was well rehearsed, folks, so I think we're supposed to. I believe so. We're going uptown, upstairs, on the podium.
Better have a neighbor card with you to handle that microphone.
I used to. Can you be a retired NABID person? All right.
What is your job, to sit there?
I think so, and I think you're supposed to sit here. And Mike, where do you want this bit of audio?
Put it on the
On the
ground.
table over there?
Oh, yeah, on the table, fine.
Table would be good. By the way, it's Mike Chimeri, right over here, who has become our automatic recorder of events here at WCWP, taking pictures, and he'll be posting those pictures all over the place.
Actually, Michael is the station historian.
That's exactly the word I
That
was
too.
looking for. Right, station historian.
Documented years of these events.
So, Bill, this is, you spent so many years with the station, and just anybody who is inducted into the hall ended up being a cohort of yours in one way or another, even going back to the original guys who you knew from the day. But this particular group are all four you're very close with through the years.
Very, very true, yeah.
Yes. And I think the first one we're going to start talking about, since we'll do ladies first, is Rita Sands.
Good.
And Rita is from the early and mid-1960s, and then went on to a fabulous news career, really at the top. And for a lady in those days, that was I'm just going to move a little bit because I'm like turned away from you. It was very unique. She, I guess the term these days is broke the glass ceiling. They talk about for women, and I guess did so really at WCWP first of all, and then went on to her career. What do you remember from her days at the station?
I didn't have a great deal of contact with Rita, but certainly subsequent to WCWP, she, I believe, was told if you wanted to get into this business, you had to get in as an engineer. And she went and got a first-class radio telephone license, and that was her entree to working at the ABC radio network, where she was able to basically have access to people that could assess her talents, and then from that point on, it launched a career on the air. So she was quite skilled, not only from an engineering standpoint, but also from being a network newscaster.
And one of my laments is that I only met her once. She came up to a homecoming event back in the 80s, and I don't remember what year it was, but there were so many people crowded around her that night that I never even got to say hello. But she was there that evening, and I know she was very special because so many people wanted to talk to her. Always admired her on the air, and it was always, even as a student, when we were told early on, Rita came through this place, and that was an inspiration that you could go on to really big things if you worked hard at WCWP. So that was all part of it. And that goes for all of the inductees here today. They all inspired us to go forward and do some great things in the industry.
Now, Bernie did an interview with Rita?
I believe. Is that where we're going next? We're going to Bernie Bernard. Had spent a wonderful afternoon during the week talking to Rita, and I believe we have that interview for you right now. So this is Bernie Bernard and Rita Sands.
I wanted to also congratulate the others who are are sharing the honor: Ted David, Frank D'Elia, and of course Bill Epperhart. It's very nice to be part of that group. They all had great careers.
Yes, they did. And you had a particularly great career, too. We were listening to you, and I always remember Bill Moser saying, listen, that's Rita. Look what she's doing. Listen to what she's doing. You can do that, too. So thank you, especially for the women at WCWP for being one of the early inspirations for us.
Well, I've never quite heard that because I think I was one of the very first few women there, so kind of felt, didn't quite know what my place was, but enjoyed being there and really valued it. I also worked in the record library. I think I started in 1963 when the station was just actually getting its wiring together and was only heard in the dormitories. And then it got a little more power, and then we actually went to the exits toward Northern Boulevard, and then went a little further, and people in the area could hear. And now I understand it's got a great coverage area which
It
I think is
does.
really, really exciting.
And with the advent of the internet, people all over the world can listen online. So it's
That's right.
a whole different thing. We have a worldwide audience now. So what was it like when you were a student here working at WCWP?
Well, I put myself through college, so I had lots of different jobs. And at the Brady Food Service, I worked in the bookstore to pay for my books. I was one of the people that worked in the dormitories and had a job in the at WCWP in the record library. And that's how that started. And I was one of the few women that started there. I may have been. And I remember a gentleman named Harry who was so smart, and he was putting wires together.
That would be Harry Lowenthal.
That's right. Yes. So there were only a few of us, and in the air until this is true. One day, everybody got sick in the cafeteria, and so it was my first opportunity to actually go on the air. And I had a small jazz show for the rest of the week, and really wrote out every single thing I said, including hello. I was excited, but I really wanted to do a good job and not disappoint anybody. So I knew where the records were, but then I went in there and had to kind of make it my own. And it was exciting. And even at that time, at the very beginning, somebody named Dan Ingram, you know who that is?
Oh, I sure do.
He used to drive by every day and listen to WCWP because he lived in Glen Cove. And when I was on the air, he stopped by and was staring through that big window in the lobby. And he went into where some of the engineers were, and they all stood up, and I thought, who in the world is that? He came in and introduced himself and said, I like the music you're playing, because he loved jazz. And he said, I like your voice, too. And he said, if you ever make it and ever get to New York, why don't you come by and say hello? And I said, well, I would. I said, who are you? He said, Dan Ingram. And, of course, I knew who he was. And, oh, my goodness, nearly passed out. And I was lucky enough to make it to New York. And then when I was at CBS, I walked across the street one day to ABC and found him and looked in the glass at him. And he remembered me. And I waved. And he laughed at such a talented, really wonderful, generous man. We became friends for life. And he had so much to offer me in terms of insight and encouragement. Of course, he was never what I would call a newsman, although I think he did a bit of everything. But he was quintessential radio, and in those years he was just perfection. The talk-up and the personality and the fearlessness, such a beautiful voice. And he's still a friend. He lives in Florida and sometimes comes back to New York. And in those years, radio people were the really big ones. We're the stars. We're the private company we'd listen to at home and in our cars. They were such individuals and offered us so much encouragement if this was a field you were interested in, because you really had, like Gene Shepard, when I worked at a radio station at night, WNEW, I would drive home and listen to him and all of his stories about baseball. Do you remember that? Or
I was on NEW-FM in the 1980s.
Oh, how wonderful!
Right. So what era were you there?
Well, when I left WCWP, I was hired by WBAB over the summer, which is on Long Island, and then WGLI.
Rita, we are following each other. I have been following you because I worked at BAB from here and then went to NEW.
Well, look at that. Oh, I'd love to hear more about that. When I started, though, women weren't really welcome on the air, so I had to co-anchor with another WCWP alumni who is John Messerschmidt. Do you know that name?
Yes, I do.
And he had used for his air name Johnny Carl. He was so good, had a beautiful voice, and so he and I co-anchored at both those stations, BAB and GLI, and I was let go from both of those because they really weren't comfortable with women. And he was so good, he was a standalone. So then I heard there was an opening in a brand new format. This takes me to WNEW-FM. This was the first staff of all-women music DJs in
So
New York
you were
City.
with Allison Steele at that time?
Yes, I was, and I was like 20 years old, so I was 10 years younger than the youngest one. And they had me on from 10 at night to 1 in the morning, and that was our shift, and made some new history with that. It was very exciting, learned a great deal. Then went on to ABC Radio Network as their first woman broadcast console engineer and tape editor. Do you remember we had a tape block? And you'd have to cut it on a diagonal and put it together with...
I do remember. Now we're all digital, but I was here in the days when we did that at WCWP and elsewhere.
Yeah, and the equivalent of Scotch tape to put it together, but that's when you could feel the sound as you tilt back and forth with both hands with huge discs, and then be able to make the correct edit. Loved that. Happened to be good at it and really liked it, but I was the first woman ever to do the console engineer work. Howard Cosell was there at the time, and I used to do his programs, and he didn't want me to, didn't trust a woman. One night I lost.
He was an old curmudgeon, though.
Well, even when he was young, he was an old curmudgeon, but got through it. Then on to WHN Radio as their first woman on-air reporter. Worked with Herb Oscar Anderson then. WCBS auditioned over there for All News, and I was their first woman anchor, which was so exciting. There for about 8 years. Then went over to CBS Radio Network, their national hourly news broadcasts on the overnight for 2 years, breaking me in that way. But it was great. And then hired away by Roone Arledge. You remember that name?
Sure do.
At ABC Network Television. I worked for World News Tonight and GMA and Nightline. And I actually was one of the very first reporters on the scene of John Lennon's murder.
Wow. Back in 1980.
Yeah, and it was, I just come back from some other state working for World News Tonight, and then the staff of Nightline just sent a truck for me, and we drove over the grass of Central Park, went over to the Dakota Apartments, and started our live coverage for Nightline, and I guess it was a West Coast update at the time. My reports are on YouTube. They last forever. But you'll see that I don't start immediately, and that's because somebody gave me an earpiece with the audio of World War II in it. So I'm not sure why that happened, but it's a perpetual... There it is, especially on the sad anniversary of his murder. But that was an amazing event to be covering that early. We were one of the first reporters.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful stories. And I have to say thank you on behalf of all the women who have come through WCWP since. And I know you don't think of yourself this way, but you really did break the glass ceiling, pave the way for us, and thank you.
Well, I don't think of it that way. You're when you work so hard, it always feels solitary, doesn't it? And you try to do the best you can because there's no training as you go along, or at least there wasn't when I started. And you get very focused, and you just want to do the best you can. You can't imagine what the future will hold for those behind you. You don't want to. You want to make a road that's open with great promise, but really what's on your mind is surviving the day. So you don't think of it. I've certainly made mistakes, so also you don't really want to think of yourself as somebody who was somebody to follow or emulate. But in the totality of it, to know that this was a period where women had a very tough time, and I could tell you many stories that it was very painful and hurtful and even sad. It was difficult tonight.
We could probably share some stories about that.
Did you have a tough time?
I did. I was the first woman ever hired by the program director at WBAB, and I remember one of the guys saying to me, "You know, Bernard, what I like about you, you do your show like a man." I'm like, well, what the hell else am I going to do?
Oh. Well, did you think about who was coming after you, or were you just saying, I just have to do another day and the best job I can, and one will lead to the next? And all along the way you learn. Right.
You do, and sometimes you have to steal the knowledge, I found, where you have to get somebody to show you how to do something. If nobody else would show you, you had to find one person and say, no, I really need to know how to do this. Will you show me how to do this the right way? So I call it stealing the knowledge. Sometime if people weren't volunteering it, well, you had to dig it out. You had to get it. You had to acquire it.
Observe, learn, and learn by mistakes. I remember once I showed up at ABC, and I had bought a new little crisp blouse, and I had left the cardboard in the collar, and the cameraman said, "Why do you look so stiff today?" And just so many things I never thought about. I mean, today dressing up is a separate art form, but then that was one of the last things on my mind, and it was keeping up with all of the men around me and those that had serious doubts. I mean, when I worked at ABC Radio Network as a first console engineer, I had my life threatened. I had people stalking me.
Wow, I had no idea.
Oh, terrible notes left in my locker. It was a male locker room, and I had to go there and make sure there were no men in there when I put my books and my equipment in there. I had to join the union, NABIT, and the engineer, the director of engineers there, Harry Curtis, laughed his way through my interview and thought it would be humorous, and he said, "Go give it a try for as long as you can last." And he had absolutely no confidence that I would last. And I loved doing it, so I did okay, but I felt I was totally alone. And when years passed and I was back at ABC Television News, they said I had to go back to radio to file my reports. And I asked them, is it possible not to? Could I do something else? Because I was so uncomfortable there, the memories would come back. And they said, no, you have to. All the reporters have to do that. So I went back, and sure enough, I see immediately a lot of the same engineers who were there, and I felt, well, they're not going to like to have me back again. But that wasn't true. They sent an emissary out, and they said, you know, Rita, it was a different time, and we want to say, would you accept our apology, and let's start over.
Wow, that's great.
How
Wonderful.
Gracious. And it was a wonderful start again. It was important that I go back when initially I really felt maybe there was a way I didn't have to, but I'm glad I did, and we all learned through those days. It was it's a great career, a great learning experience, but through it all, I think what I felt most important was how we convey so much through voice alone, especially in radio, obviously, not the television. That's why I returned to radio, because I love television, but it wasn't radio. Loved radio. And so when I was asked to return to WCBS for a drive time position, I left network television, which a lot of people wouldn't do, to go back to my first and longest love, which was radio, whether it's news or music or talk. But the connection that you have, that one-to-one, and the sense that it's like when people in college train to be athletes, or when they pick a hobby or pick a certain kind of line of training. It's how you define yourself and how you best find out who you are. And for me, a shy girl from Queens, New York, I grew up through my voice, and I learned to trust myself through my voice and what I could accomplish. And once I found that strength and that feedback, I knew that's where I belonged. And I think everybody should give WCWP a chance who goes to Post to go on and see, to introduce themselves to their own voice, because you know people don't really know how it sounds until they go in, make a recording, spend some time, and figure out, gee, is this the person that I know? Am I projecting who I really am, who I really hope to be?
Well, thank you. I'd like to say congratulations again, being voted into the WCWP Hall of Fame, and we hope you come visit sometime if you're in this part of the country.
I look forward to it. It's one of the most beautiful places ever. Many good memories there, and many, of course, at WCWP. And for the people I share this award with, Ted, Frank, and, of course, Bill, this is something I'll never forget.
Well, that was really nice. That was Rita Sands, of course, and being interviewed by Bernie Bernard, who's right here. It's amazing. The two of you did have such similarities from your post days, the early parts of your careers.
Yeah, it was tough. As she mentioned, it was tough, but I have to say, thank you. While I was at WCWP, for people like Frank DeLeo, said, what are you doing? No, you do it this way. Bernie, what are you doing? And to Bill Moser, like, that edit really sucked. I know you can do better. Go back and do it. I know you can do it better than that. And to Bill Epperhart, who was wonderful. He mentored a lot of students there, and he was the one who would shake his head and go, Bernie, 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 what are you doing? No, do it this way. Don't do it that way. So, for all the people here, And for Dan, who's still doing that with the current students, especially the women at WCWP, everybody gets a fair shot. It's too bad Christina Kay is not here. She is the next generation, kind of passing the torch on to her. She is on the air at WAOK today. She was one of my former students. She's the program director at WCWP. She does voiceover work, so she's going to be helping the people following her at WCWP to learn what they can learn and launch their careers.
Well, obviously, Rita couldn't join us today, so Bernie will be accepting the plaque on Rita's behalf, and then, of course, we'll be forwarding it to her. This is the official WCWP Hall of Fame plaque that is being given to Rita Sands, class of 1966, being presented here in April of 2014. So let's give a hand, even though she's not here, to Rita Sands. I think you can put it down for the time.
Hey, Jeff,
being. Yeah.
a couple of thoughts. And listening to Rita, doesn't she sound great? Even to this day. She spoke about the record library and the stories that people can tell about things that went on in the record library. It was one of the few doors that could be closed. At some point, we needed professional record cabinetry in the record library. We had some steel shelves in there which were not quite suitable for LPs. So I had contracted with this company, Grenan Furniture, and they had built record cabinets for every radio station from here to California, beautiful crafted cabinets. And the guy came and measured and went away for about 2 months, came back with this carload of beautifully finished cabinetry in the back of his trailer. And he calls me aside and he said, "I got to ask you a question." I said, "Yeah, what?" He said, "I've heard there are a lot of Jews on Long Island." And I'm going, "What is this man talking about?" He said, "Could you show me one?" I could not believe that this guy, I guess he was from some way out in Ohio farmland, but he had never seen a person. I mean, I was speechless. I mean, to ask a question like that was in some respects so naive, but so obnoxious. But you know, in the rare occasion, I had nowhere to go with this. Unbelievable. The other thing that Rita pointed out was John Messerschmidt, who later became a project manager at NBC. He's no longer with us. I tried to track him, some of the history of what he did at NBC down, but it didn't go too far. And Dan Ingram, the reason that Dan Ingram was at WCWP is that one of his, I don't know, 10 or 15 wives was a student here. And he had a home in Oyster Bay Cove with a studio that he called the Marlboro Studio, because it was paid for by his voiceover work for Marlboro cigarettes. But Dan somehow got pulled into the station one day. I didn't have anything to do with this, because I had worked with him years later. And he recorded this promo, which ran just forever on WCWP in the days. And it went, "Hi, I'm Dan Ingram. Whenever I'm on the campus of CW Post College, I always listen to WCWP." And we ran that, not me, but I said, "Do you know what the man is saying? Whenever he's on the campus, he's never on the campus. Therefore, he never listens to WCWP." But it was the voice of Dan Ingram, and somehow that had that magic
Yeah, that meant
magic
something.
sound, yeah.
Sure.
Whenever I'm on the campus, I always listen. Well, when are you here, Dan?
Well, a lot of Post people ended up working with Dan along the way,
Did, yeah.
including Bill Epperhart and you, of course,
Yeah.
and Frank, who we're going to be talking about next. There's a guy named D'Elia here.
Mike Phillips.
And, yep, Mike, also, that's right. So it's funny, Rita mentioned the ABC radio network, and I had the opportunity to work for Harry Curtis briefly also as a summer relief engineer. It's one of my first jobs while I was still in school. So Harry was...
I never worked for Harry. He was a terrorist, wasn't he? Didn't he ask some really intimidating questions?
I think my favorite moment with Harry was they have fire drills in those buildings. That was at 1926 Broadway across from Lincoln Center. And every so often I had to run a fire drill. And if you know anything about the ABC radio network, it was 4 networks in one. And so there was constantly a newscast coming up somewhere around during the hour. There was top of the hour, 15, bottom of the hour, and then 55. And in between, there were things that were done, recorded, fed down the line, whatever they had to do. So if you wanted to schedule a true fire drill and really clean the place out, it had to be at a very precise time. Otherwise, you ran the risk of missing a network newscast, which wasn't really going to happen. So one afternoon, and I'm just, like I say, a summer relief engineer, so I don't really know what's going on. All of a sudden, the bells start ringing, and the guy says, "Oh, it's a fire drill. That's all right. Just follow everybody out." And so down we go, and there's Harry right by the elevator on the 6th floor there yelling, "This is a fire drill. We must use the steps, because if this were a true fire, the elevator would not work." So he made everybody run down 6 flights of steps onto Broadway, and it was the summer, like 95 degrees outside, brutally hot day. And eventually everybody gets outside, and then the murmuring starts. "Harry, we have a newscast in 7 minutes. Harry, we have a newscast in 6 minutes." And Harry's standing there, this is true, in a fire chief's hat. He had a fire chief's hat that he wore to run these things. And do you recall back in the 60s and 70s, the civil defense security bunkers that were built around town? Well, Harry had a CD, which is not the CD we know today, but civil defense. And he put on his civil defense armband and his fire chief's hat and escorted everybody down to Broadway, and they start yelling at him that now it's 5 minutes until the network news, Harry. So finally they say, "Okay, all is clear." People are staring at us on the sidewalk, think we're all nuts, the entire staff of the ABC radio network. "All right, all is clear. I will just ask you to please allow those that have the next newscast to please take the first elevator up, and then the rest of you can follow." And we went back upstairs. That was the only fire drill I was ever involved in. I have never forgotten that, in the summer of 1974. So there we go. Let's move on.
No, we're not moving on. I got another story.
Sure, go ahead.
I never worked over at the 1926 because I worked 15 years at 1330. But when I got there, in a relatively short period of time, we had a gentleman by the name of Henry Plymack that was transferred down from TV. And the ABC building, every floor was eggshell white. And this was back in the early 70s. And Henry Plymack came in and said, no. Every fire extinguisher at 1330 had been painted white. And they put a sticker on it that said ABC. Well, for anyone who knows anything about fire, there's a class A, B, and C fire. And fire extinguishers cannot be painted anything other than red. Thousands of these things had to go out the door. I wish I had one. It would have been a collector's item.
Oh, the stories in these places, great stories in the industry behind the scenes that listeners didn't get to hear. We move on to our second inductee. Is a guy named Elias sitting over here that I think you know.
How do you spell that?
Frank, all I can say is one of the first people I met when I stepped into the station in 1971, and he had a way about him. He said to me, "What are you interested in?" I said, "News and sports. That's what I like." To this day, that's what I'm still a news junkie and a sports nut for those that know me. He says, "All right." And he ripped off a piece of wire copy from our teletype machine and said, "Read this." So I read it, and he says, "That's pretty good. Can you come back tonight and do a 1-minute newscast at whatever time?" 1 minute. That's how, we were a little shorthanded in those days. The station had only been back on the air from a big shutdown, I guess, a few months. And it was actually good fortune for me because it opened the way. Anything I was interested in doing, there was a spot to do it. But Frank became he trained me very well and got me going in that place, and I owe him a lot for that. So Frank, and when's the first time you met Frank at the station?
Oh, about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
A turning point in the history of the station was when Steve Post was hired to replace our director of broadcasting. It was McConaughey, right? And Steve came from WBAI, and he had a very open-minded, let's say, ultra-liberal approach to programming. And there was a program that was produced on tape which featured a simulated female orgasm. No. This was, well, Steve Post was summarily fired, and I had been called by Dean Mates to come down and meet him in his Locust Valley home, and I was directed basically to shut that place down now.
You were the chief engineer
I was
basically
the chief
at the time,
engineer,
right?
yeah. So I came in, the old Collins transmitter, I took the final transmitting tube out and the crystal, and Steve Post was summarily dismissed. The radio station was then put into, well, it was occupied by dissidents, I guess you could call them in the day. There were hundreds of people that came to the defense of the people who worked there. I mean, we were a handful of people who worked there, but all of a sudden half the campus decided they had some affiliation with the radio station. And the station was occupied for 4 months by dissidents. And the university was somewhat fearful that if they closed the place down, that the building might incur some damage. So they allowed the occupancy of the building by the dissidents. And at 4 months later, President Peyton called me over and he said, "We got to do something to clear up this mess." He decided that, and the place was a pigsty. It was just a garbage pit of hippies hanging around and claiming that they had the right to say whatever they felt like on the air. President Peyton asked me to put the station back on the air, and I said, okay, but I had to sort out issues. And it was with the help of Frank D'Elia that we were able to put the station back on the air with a handful of hand-picked responsible people like Frank and Ted. And in fact, Frank has some clippings, press clippings of Ted, I think, on the board. And there's a clipping, I don't know if we still have that, of you and Ted, I think, standing next to the transmitter. Oh, you did, yeah, okay. So Frank was very, very instrumental in getting WCWP back on the air some 4 months later, and has certainly been an inspiration to dozens and dozens of people from that point on.
Why don't you join us up here, Frank, and
tell us.
Instead of talking about you, talk with you. Frank D'Elia.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jeffrey?
I have one.
Oh, you have one, all right.
Fix your mic a little, Bill.
See, obviously, a kid did this because anybody our age, it's a big step, you know?
Hello. Tasting.
Well, the reason I have a job at all is because one afternoon, this man said to me, "You want to come to work with me today?" And we got into Volvo number 1, the black one, probably sometime in, I don't know, the late 1970 maybe, or even earlier. And we drove into work, and I spent 8 hours with him on the 8th floor of the ABC building, going back and forth between WABC and WPLJ. And I came out of there at midnight and thought, okay, now I know what I'm going to do, because I had no clue. I was one of those people, like many of us, who went to school in the late 60s. I started here in 1967. You knew if you didn't go to college, you were going to go into the Army, and there was this nasty little thing going on in Southeast Asia that most of us didn't want to do, so we did it. In the first year, I had 3 majors. I started as a drama major, became an English major, and I think finally became a music major, and that's how I wound up at the radio station.
But what drew you to come into the station in the first place? Because the radio station, those that know, we're right behind the Tilles Center over here, but none of this was here.
This was a
really
forest.
Right.
Yeah.
It was, the station itself was back in the woods in those days. And it was hard to find. You had to know it was there.
You did.
To get there.
I remember coming to an orientation at the radio station during freshman orientation in early fall of 1967. I was a commuter student, lived in Queens, and had been a bad boy the summer of '67 and wrecked the car that was supposed to be my transportation every day from Queens to Post. So I spent the better part of that year hitching rides with people I went to high school with that went here, somebody I'd meet in a class who lived someplace that I could take a long-hour railroad train back to Queens. And then in the next year, when I was a sophomore, I had wheels now, so I was able to do stuff. As a music major, I had to take a distribution. They called that in those days. You had to take a distribution, some class above the 50 level, in a related part of the program. So it was an arts field, so you had theater arts or you had art. And as a freshman, I took an art appreciation course sitting in that huge hall in humanities building with about 350 other freshmen in the dark, watching slides for an entire semester. I know Christiana's World, I know Guernica, and there's a couple of other things, and that's what I got out of that, so I'm not doing that. So I signed up for this theater arts course called Stage Lighting. Went over to the little theater the first day of the class, and couldn't find the class, went to the secretary, and she said, "Oh, you're the one that signed up for it." I was the only one. So they canceled the class. So I went back to my advisor, and I signed up for Theater Arts 52, which was Introduction to Radio, taught by Mr. McConaughey at the radio station. So I had to find the radio station for class, and then he happened to drop that if you would like to get involved with the radio station, it might be good for some extra credit in the class, and that's how I did it. I started doing newscasts. Not quite as thrown in as I did to you, but it was kind of that, and then that's how it started.
Well, I can compare it. I have a friend who went to Hofstra at about the same time. David Levy, you know Dave. And he used to be jealous of me because I was able to get right on by coming here. He went to Hofstra. It took him a year, literally, to say a word into a microphone. He had to work behind the scenes. They had so many people. They had to work behind the scenes and learn writing, which helped him because he became a fine newscaster and needed to write. But he didn't get on the air very quickly at all, and he was jealous of the fact that I literally got on the day I walked into the place, and by the next weekend, you had me doing news on football games, which was like 10, 15 minutes long. So, I mean, quickly you just... I always like to say Frank had the ability to throw you into the deep end of the pool, and you'd have to find your way out of the pool. So you learned quickly.
Hey, we needed people.
Yes,
we didn't have people, you know?
So let's go back now. So now you're working at the station.
Right.
But then Bill mentions that the station goes through this shutdown. So
right.
You're working there at the time.
Yeah.
Now, knowing your dedication to the business, as I came to know through the years, and of course the Bill Epperharts and Ted, who have that professional
right.
beacon in their heads about it. How did that strike you as all of this was going down, as the story that Bill just told about the shutdown?
Well, it was very strange because that night that Bill had taken me to work was before this had happened. So I kind of had this path in my mind charted now, and then this happened. And I happened to be the news director at the station when it happened. And I remember it was like, what are we going to do? And the radio station was my home because as a commuter student, I didn't live here. I didn't have a bunch of buddies in the dorm and, the same kind of familiarity with the place that people who lived on campus did. Every night I had to get back in the car. We'd moved to Bayside then, so it wasn't as far away. And I could just get 88.1 on the radio in Bayside too, which was good. But the radio station was my home. Had an hour and a half between classes, you were at the radio station. There was a lot of nights you'd go home, have dinner, come back to the radio station and spend the night there until we turned the place off. So this was really traumatic. And I remember, these were my friends that were doing this, but Bill's right, people came out of the woodwork. It wasn't just about the 8 or 10 people that had worked there. Suddenly there were rallies. I remember there was a rally, and I don't remember where it was. We didn't have this place then, so I don't remember. Maybe it was in Humanities someplace in some big hall that they had William Kunstler speaking at. And it was like, we were children of the 60s. We didn't have Kent State to do, that kind of stuff that had happened a couple of years before. So it was that kind of a thing. And I just was kind of flabbergasted. And I guess I must have kept in touch with you during that time
Yeah.
too. And, we kind of were like, well, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? How are we going to do this? How are we going to get the radio station back? And it was important to us. It was our life, really. And, to just go to class and be done with class and go home, there was a big empty part of us.
So then the opportunity came to put the place back on the air, and you depended on this core of a handful, as you stated.
Well, I was charged with this awesome responsibility at a very young age, and I wasn't more than what?
He was 12 at the time.
2 years
Yeah, you were a couple of
than,
years older than us, that's all.
You guys, but...
And I think that's when you brought Bill in, too, didn't
That's
you? Bring Bill
correct, yeah,
Epperhart in?
because we needed people who were focused on this.
And you showed up at the right time because
Just-
there was
just
probably,
time-
six of us
empty.
running the place
Yeah.
at that point. We had limited hours, right? It was 4 hours a day, I think, or something like that.
I think we started with 4 and
Yeah.
we gradually expanded.
Yeah.
Now, William Kunstler filed lawsuit against the university, charging that the students' right to free speech had somehow been compromised, and of course that was summarily tossed out of court. But it was a major turning point in the history of WCWP. It was also outlined in a chapter in a book by Steve Post called "Playing in the FM Band," which I think was an appropriate title, and there was a reference to me in there, not very
Well, I can understand that.
complimentary. But
Well, he had like 3 months here, I think, didn't he? It didn't last long.
Steve Post is a brilliant broadcaster, but he was way out of his element when he came
Yeah,
here.
it just wasn't what he was looking to do.
Bernie is also part of that era, and she had a little trouble getting around. So if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to run down with this mic. We'll get a couple of her thoughts, because we've been talking about putting the place back on. Well, the fact that you were also part of this, putting the place back on.
It was. I lasted, we should get over here a little bit. I lasted about a week with all of the dissidents, and all these people showed up. They started trashing.
You were there beforehand also?
Yeah, they started trashing the station. I'm like, who the hell are all these people? And what are they doing to the place? This is our place. And again, I stayed for about a week. During this whole sit-in period, and it was kind of cool in the year of protest. It was, late 60s, 70. Or
70s, I think, yeah.
And all of a sudden, I got the feeling that, what are all these people doing to my station? They're trashing the place. Who are they anyway?
We didn't know. You'd come in and you didn't know
You
a
didn't
soul.
know who the heck they were, so I said, I'm getting out of here. I'm not going to be involved in this, because when the station comes back on, which I knew it would, I want to be there again. So I'm going to sit this out. And there was a dean who was here at the time, Beeman. His name was Dean Beeman. And I became a regular up in his office. When's the station coming back? I want to be part of it again. This is what I want to do in my life. I could transfer to Hofstra. He said, no, stay. It's okay. It'll come back on again soon, I promise you. And I said, I want to be able to go back there and be able to help put it back together again. And he said, just be patient, just be patient. And then I heard it came back on again, and came over and said, hey, I'm back. I want to help put this place back together again. That's pretty much what it was.
Now, Bernie, the station was clearly divided among a liberal and conservative faction, and that was not only politically, but it was also in terms of music
Oh, sure, the
taste.
top
So
40 and
we had
progressive people. Yeah.
progressive people on one side of the fence, and I again had to pull this diverse group of people together, and Mike Riccio was certainly quite instrumental in the putting the top 40 format back on the air. And who were some of the people on the freeform side? You were there, and Mark Indig, I think, or was he?
Trying to remember who. Now, Bobby, you
Rosen.
graduated in 70. Mel Rosen was there. Boy, I'm really...
Ken Franklin?
Ken Franklin. No, he was a little after
Later.
me. There was...
Later.
Kevin had left. Let's see, who else was there? Gary something. I can't remember his name.
Yeah. Chuck.
And then a guy by the name of Ed Mann, I believe, was there too. And I'm trying to remember the other folks who did the progressive stuff. Rick was more with the top 40 group, but the thing is, I think after the station was back, we appreciated each other. I don't think there was, we had differences in music, but I was happy to see these guys again. And the new people who came in too, like Bruce and Jeff, it was terrific. And you kind of put that aside because, hey, that's what they want to do. Maybe they're going to go into top 40 radio, and they need to do what they do here, and I'm going to do something else, but I need to be here learning how to do this too. So I think we all got to be terrific friends. We used to kid each other about, the formats, but it was all in good fun. I think after the station came back on, there were some oppositions in musical styles, but I think we all really got along with each other. You agree?
I would definitely agree. There were classical shows too.
Sure.
We had Bruce Mahler.
That's right.
And who went on to a little bit of a career.
Bruce Mahler was an amazingly talented comic, and he appeared in, I think, at least 3 of the
Police Academy movies.
Yeah.
Bruce appeared on.
What was the show Fridays on ABC?
Friday,
He was one of the principal players on that, and
one of his acts was he was able to play classical piano in an iron lung backwards.
right,
Merv Griffin,
right. Merv Griffin took a liking to him. I know he did some stuff in Atlantic City for Merv, and he was also, if you're a Seinfeld fan, he was the rabbi on Seinfeld. There's only 3 episodes, but they get played so much, people think he's a regular on Seinfeld. And that goes back to his Friday days because those guys were all connected with that.
And
Fridays.
And Michael Richards was part of that, that troupe.
Yeah, and so he was at the station. He was doing classical stuff. Yes, we all learned to run the board.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing that this one instituted, is we all got to do all kinds of jobs. And today, I have to look back, a lot of guys that, not so much now, but when we started, well, you started a long time before I did, but when I started, there were people that you worked with that had worked in some little station in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. I always thought that my time at WCWP was like that. Because when I was working with a newsman and we were cutting news actualities in the days when you had to use a razor blade and a grease pencil, I knew what he was looking for because I knew from doing news at WCWP. When I was sitting working with a disc jockey, I knew what his side was like because Bill would have, whenever we did a music show, we'd work with somebody. We weren't doing combo. We were doing so that somebody else could get involved in the program and do the stuff. And Bernie's right. Sometimes it was somebody like Bernie, who we were doing. She might be doing a progressive show. And do you remember what we used to call the afternoon show, the Going Great show?
Oh yeah, Ronnie Hagerman and Ted.
Yeah. And so that was, it was totally a different format. But you know what? If you could do that, you could do anything. That's I have to put that at Bill's feet because he was the one that, no little, and that's I think why we all got along too, because we all worked together because of that. Everybody did a little of everything.
Right, and I come in and I say to you, I want to do news and sports, fine, but you say, but you're still going to have to go down and get at least your 3rd-class license to get started.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to learn the board. And I'm looking, and those who know me know to this day I'm the least technical guy you will ever meet. But yet I became proficient enough that's the career I ended up with, was actually running a board, which is hard for me to still believe.
Tell me to believe that going down there to get your 3rd in that building was not one of the most
that was traumatic.
Memorable moments of your
It was very memorable.
College
I
career
had to pass because I wanted to keep working at the station. But yes, and that made us do a little bit of everything at the station, and
you got an appreciation for everybody's job. You
Yes,
knew
you did.
you might not be good enough to be sitting on the air in a New York radio station doing news or playing music, but you knew what the other guy was doing. You could sit there and do it.
For those who think that we're taking an awful lot of time just as Frank is being inducted, and we are, but these stories actually go on. We're really inducting 3 people pretty much at the same time because Ted is involved in all of these situations too at that time. And of course, Bill was already mentioned by Bill, but, and we'll hear more about him, but it's really all connected. So these stories kind of go on, and so they'll be a little shorter, I guess, yeah, too, because we're telling all the stories now.
No, we'll find more, don't worry.
Oh, we'll find more.
What time do
Does
we
anyone
have
have
to get out
anything
of
to
here
say
by?
about Ted?
You mean nice
But
things?
before we officially move on to Ted, let's officially induct Frank D'Elia into the WCWP Hall of Fame.
Do we have to move now? Or
No, you
Okay,
stay
good.
right there. And as was the case with Rita,
Should I stand up because I look like, like I'm...
all right, Phil, you should stand up for this too, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The official plaque reads, the WCWP Hall of Fame, Frank D'Elia III, from the class of 1971, and presented here in April of 2014. Frank D'Elia, newest member of the WCWP Hall of Fame. A little posing, there we go.
Okay.
The pictures, congratulations, sir.
That means an awful lot. I have to say, I owe so much of my life to this place, to people like Bill, who aimed me in the right direction, and to just the stuff that we did here that gave me the tools I needed. I mentioned Kent State before. I remember when all that stuff exploded that spring, I was working in the news department at WCWP, and somebody handed me a cassette machine and said, go to Hofstra, they're having a demonstration there. And like you had your little press pass and you got into the basketball game, I went to Hofstra with this little WCWP press pass, had no idea where I was going, what to do, and whatever. Got this tape, it wasn't really great, but then came back and got thrown into the back studio and spent the next 7 hours editing tape. And that was the night I learned to edit tape. And it sucked in the beginning, but about the 6th hour, it was really getting better, and by the 9th hour, I could do it like nobody's business. And every time, I haven't touched a razor blade in a long time because we don't do that anymore, but every time I touched a razor blade and would do an edit, I would think back to that night where I learned how to do it.
We covered an awful lot of events. Bruce Leonard, who's here today, Bruce and I once got to meet Ted Kennedy. He was speaking over at Eisenhower Park. And we got to cover that one night. So WCWP opened some places for us to get into, another official thing that we did. So
You
great
talked
stuff.
about the press card. I remember these little,
Yes, I still
Press
have one
card.
signed
Do
by
you?
you. Yes.
whoa. That brings up a point. Now, today everybody carries a digital camera or a digital phone around, but there's a lot of stuff that's out there. And Dan and I, over the course of the last couple of years, have had some conversations about an archive of all this stuff. I have, I think my wife has signed me up for that show, Hoarders, whatever it is.
Okay, I can see that.
And
You never tried to leave the 8th floor at 1330 at 12:15 with Bill because he'd have to go collect his stuff. We would some nights be there for 20 minutes looking for his keys before we could leave.
that's very true. But one day there were 2 huge plastic garbage bags, barrels filled with Pam's jingles. Mm-hmm. They were headed for the garbage pail. Wrong. That would never get past me. But if you guys, and of course in today's world of digital, everybody's recording everything all the time, but if we can start to piece little parts of WCWP history together. And what I was saying about Dan is that we had a conversation a while back with the archives people over in the library, and they said they would be perfectly happy to preserve this stuff and make it accessible to anyone who wants to research the history. So I've got tons of stuff, and if you've got some things that you can digitize and you want to just say, let's share this with the rest of the group, funnel it into Dan and we'll take an inventory of
We
it.
can start with 3 rolls of
Yeah,
3 reels of tape.
I understand you have
right
Dan's
there.
tape machine.
I do,
Frank brought
yeah.
them in today.
Because I don't have a tape machine at WABC anymore.
There they are.
Okay.
Sue is holding them up now.
I can digitize those, that's correct. Yeah.
Something to do with some shows and some interviews.
Yeah,
that,
a prison special we did
in 1970.
1970.
So it's well over 40 years ago. 40 years old.
I came across I guess it was a holiday card from Shirley Sandberg when we started doing community interview shows. Shirley from Roslyn she was a just amazing woman out of the community that sat down and spoke with hundreds and hundreds of people. I looked her up the other day, and it appears that she's 93 years old. I was going to reach out to her and see if I can do a phoner. So if you got stuff that you're hoarding, and
those old cassettes,
Yeah.
anything, they can be heard.
I have
Even
the
Dan,
ability-
there's a cassette machine in the station. Is that still hooked up in the back? It could be hooked up again.
I have the ability to do reel-to-reel and cassette. So if you want to give it to Dan, and then Dan can pass it along to me, or he can mail it to me, or whatever, and we can probably have a YouTube channel or something set up for listening to this stuff.
All right, and I think now we will move on to our next inductee, Ted David, or as he's being named today, Ted David Gluckman. I'm reading the plaque upside down. And yes, it does. That's what he wanted on there. Yes. Your memories of Ted from those bygone days.
Anybody who knows Ted today knows him then. He hasn't changed, has he?
I have nightmares.
He's the same. Do you remember when we used to come back to the station after it turned off at night, and he'd make funny phone calls too? There was I think was it WHBI that used to sell time, and there was a guy on, I think, Friday night who did the show, and we swore he did it from the kitchen of some restaurant someplace.
Yeah.
Because all you would hear would be glasses and silverware, and every once in a while somebody would drop a pile of dishes. And we would be sitting, I think, I hate to say it, until 2 or 3 in the morning, sitting there with the station was off the air. Bill would go check, make sure the transmitter was dead, and Ted would sit in the control room and make crank phone calls. And Bill and I would sit in the studio and laugh our ass off. And he would call. What was his famous one? Do you remember his famous one?
Well,
Can we say that one?
The guy that was doing that show on WHBI was Happy Holiday.
That's right.
And Happy Holiday had a jingle, which
Yes.
was Happy Holiday.
It was the song. He just cut
And
it out of the.
It was just so bad, and you could hear a phone ring. He was taking phone calls on the air. So there must have been a phone right there next to the microphone. And we figured out that basically if we called, we could hear ourselves ring on the air, and we realized there was no delay.
No delay.
So Ted, who is just brilliant when it comes to being spontaneous, he gets Happy Holiday on the phone. He says, I want to dedicate a song to all the Schwarzes in Brooklyn. Okay? So Happy Holiday goes on the air. He says, yeah, this is going out to all the Schwarzes in Brooklyn. We couldn't believe that this guy was that dumb.
Ted got off the phone, came into the studio. We all sat there for, I guess, like 20 seconds, and then he did it. And I don't think we could do anything else the rest of the night. We just laughed. Ted was always the one to talk you into anywhere. You know, if you wanted to go anywhere, oh yeah, we're going. Come on, we'll go. And he'd go. I think Ted worked. He must have worked at PIX then.
Yeah.
And he would just go in and say, oh, blah, 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 and these people would have this look on their face, like, you know, and he'd have like 4 or 5 of us in tow, and in we'd go to someplace. And it was like, how did you do that? It's the old thing, just act like you belong, and nobody has the nerve to question you.
I guess we were the original jerky boys, though, with those crank phone calls.
Well, the jerky part, at least, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I remember Ted telling me years later that he was telling his kids, oh, you know, we used to do this back in the early 70s. This is nothing new, you know.
Well, Frank and I, when we were at WABC, the old button sets, I think they had a dial in those days.
Yes.
There was a technique of taking the phone apart and pulling out one of the springs, which when you pressed a button down, another button came up. And by taking the spring out, you could push 2 buttons down simultaneously. So we were calling the pizza places.
Right. Or 2 Chinese restaurants, Shinlan East and Shinli West. Yeah. We never worked for a living. I mean, that's what I discovered going to work with him that night. You know, I don't know, was it your line when people would say to you something about radio and you'd say it's better than working for a living? I've been saying that for 40-something years now.
Not mine.
Well, it's true. I mean, you know, we would do this stuff. We would sit in the shop, and the phone in the shop was permanently like that. If you wanted to make a phone call, a regular phone call, you had to choose 2 fingers so that you only got 1 button down.
Ray's.
And
Hello, Ray's
yeah,
Pizza.
right, Ray's.
Ray's, what do you want? This is Ray's. There are 10 raised pizzas in the phone book.
And then they'd start fighting with each other. We called 2 Greek delis one time, and they started yelling at each other. We got Bessie, the cleaning lady, in, and said to Bessie, "What are they saying?" She was Greek, and she says, "Oh my God, I can't say those words," and she ran out with her hands over her ears.
Well, back to Ted.
Ted, yes.
Ted
well,
is-
he started this. He was the one.
He did. He usually does.
The great thing about Ted is he can do it with such a straight face. What an amazing prankster, though. Some of the stuff that he...
He came up to visit me at ABC one day. One of his sons wanted to meet Bob Grant. So he was at CNBC at the time. So I went into John Minnelli, who was the program director, and I said, "Look, I went to college with Ted David from CNBC." He said, "Oh yeah, I know who he is." I said, "He called me the other day. His son and he are big Bob Grant fans. Do you think it would be all right if he came up and spent a half hour, 45 minutes in the control room and just watched? They'd like to watch Bob do a show." "Oh yeah, I don't think there's any problem." So he comes up, and I have him in the control room introduce him to the engineer on doing the show and the producer, and everything's good. And I had to go do something, and I come back, and Ted's not there. And I had no idea where he was. And I found him in Rush Limbaugh's studio talking to Rush Limbaugh, and it's like, all right, where did he will go anywhere, he will do anything. Don't put any kind of a challenge in front of him. He will accept it and make you sorry you put the challenge down.
That is true. I just a few months ago, he invited me over to News 12 one evening, so I went over there and I'm watching the newscast, and that particular evening he was working with Lee Tyrell, who's been there for forever, I think, since they built the place. And during one of the breaks, she calls me over like this. She says, did you really say you know Ted for over 40 years? I said, yes. Tell me, what was he like 40 years ago? I said, That's him. Impossible. I said, no, that's exactly the same guy that I met 40 years ago. And for the rest of the night, she kept, during break, she would just look over at me and just shake her head. So he...
and if anyone who's a Facebook friend of his knows he's also the king of selfies.
Yeah.
He has gotten it to the point that you don't even know they're selfies anymore. He does it so well.
What a perfect lead-in, because we're going to hear from the man himself. Ted can't be here today, but has sent along this message to all of us from his home down in the Sunshine State of Florida. Are we ready to roll, or am I in the old days stretching? What are we doing? We're ready to roll? All right, this is Ted David.
Good afternoon, and happy Saturday, and a happy Hall of Fame, WCWP Hall of Fame Induction Day. I had hoped to be in New York, but for reasons that were unforeseen at the time, unfortunately I am still here in Florida. With that said, first let me say thank you very much for this honor. Clearly there is a lot to be said for being named to the Hall of Fame of WCWP. Of all the radio stations, and there's Hofstra, and there's Delphi, and WFUV, and so on, I suspect our station has turned out more people who worked in the industry successfully, be it radio, TV, on the air, or off the air, than any other station. And I don't think we're always necessarily recognized for that. In any event, congratulations to my fellow inductees, Bill Epperhart posthumously, and Bill, we do miss you. And of course, Rita Sands, with whom I am in touch regularly, and Frank D'Elia, who continues to work actively in the business at WABC. Well, that's a great crowd of people to be included in with, along with the previous inductees. And I just want to say thank you very much for thinking of me and including me here. Of course, I got my start at WCWP back in 1968. It was Bill Moser who I first met with my father when we came into the station, and it was Bill's maturity, Bill's vision, and Bill's knowledge, even back then, that led us to decide this was the place for me. And of course, thereafter, it became clear that WCWP was the best operated, best managed radio station on a college level. When Bill developed his contacts with ABC, we ended up with all kinds of equipment that was handed off. And so we ended up with a very professional station in a place that allowed many of us to learn how to do our trade, practice our craft, if you will, in such a way that we were easily able to get commercial jobs. Certainly, thanks to Dan Cox for his continued administration of the radio station. Thanks to Pete Bellotti for keeping us all together. Thanks to Pat and Jeff Kroll for their new role in the Alumni Association. And thanks to all of you for being so kind and generous with this award and recognizing me as a WCWP member of the Hall of Fame. Have a wonderful celebration, and congratulations to all.
There you go, Ted David. Now, Ted did, just like everyone else, Ted did a little bit of everything at the station through the years. I mean, the joking part aside, I mean, he did a lot for the place while he was there, and then long after, he gave his voices, I don't know how many times over. He was on every jingle we had there for years.
And Ted was one of those that started to work professionally very early on. He, you know, some of us waited till the end. He did not. I think he was hardly in the door, and he was working, you know. And then he'd come back with these great stories of being at HLI or one of the other many places he worked at.
Even filling in at ABC during a strike when he was very young.
Yes, we've heard that story a lot.
Yes, yes.
When he made the leap to television in the early days of CNBC, I think he was one of the first at CNBC. Yeah. There was another guy there from WCWP by the name of Mark Hames. Now, Mark is no longer with us. Mark Hames. Mark came from WCWP. Now, Ted and Mark were here at two different times, so they didn't know each other. But when Mark landed at CNBC, I said to Ted, he's one of us. And they co-anchored morning show for many, many years. It was kind of interesting. It was the odd couple because Mark was just crumbs all over the anchor desk and Ted was so meticulous. They shared the same dressing room and they were at each other's throat constantly until they realized that they both had the similar sense of humor and the sense of timing. Ted's sense of timing is absolutely astonishing. He can talk up records. He can sense the pace of a TD on the switcher and pull crap just before they call the camera shot. And some of the antics that, when I was down in Charlotte with Ted a few years ago, we visited the NBC hub down there, and this engineer comes out and he says, "You're Ted David?" "Yeah." And he said, "I got to show you something." He had collected all of these crazy outtakes from the Ted when he was prepping to do a feed. And this was just a marvelous collection of the essence of Ted David off the air. But Ted and Mark finally realized that they were quite a tag team in the morning.
Well, I think I think the three of us are going to have to stand up so that we get the official picture with the plaque.
Is he watching us? Do we have Skype on?
He probably is, knowing him.
If there's a way, he has it. But this will be presented, as the others were, WCWP Hall of Fame to Ted David Gluckman, class of both 72 and 74 when he did graduate work, and presented here in April of 2014. For Ted.